Detectives never work in isolation, whether appealing for help from the public.
She said that is the vehicle that your hitchhiker got into.
Or calling in the big guns for tactical support.
There's 5 or 6 firearms loaded in the house, so it's a dangerous business.
It takes a team effort to crack the toughest cases.
I had a guy who was my needle in the haystack detective, and that was his sole task. Tell me who the victim's going to be.
There are 1,400 detectives in the New Zealand Police tasked with solving the most serious crime, but none of them works alone. The crime is solved by breaking up an investigation into smaller tasks and bringing together specialised teams, each with a specific focus. Seasoned detectives know the power of the team.
Qualities of a good detective start with the team.
Ultimately, the buck stops with the boss, but at the end of the day, it's a team effort. If it was that good, you just get in a car and go out and deal with it all yourself like they do on television.
We work as a team to create our luck by seeing a huge range of people, interviewing lots of people, looking for the little thing or the things that will break the investigation and give us the result.
We had surveillance squads, we had a helicopter on standby, we had police dog squad availability as well, the Wellington Armed Defender Squad. We had all of these things that happen in a police inquiry that the general public don't know about.
By harnessing the combined power of many smaller squads, the team on Operation Mist solved one of the most baffling investigations in recent years. Regional council workers laying poison in the Rimutaka Forest Park made an unusual find in the bush.
Hey, Pahi, come and have a look at this.
Buried in the ground, well off the beaten track, was a plywood bunker with a sinister welcome note.
We didn't know really who was involved. We didn't know the intent it was going to be used for, but we needed to make sure that nobody was immediately in danger in the time that we were trying to do these initial inquiries as well. So we had deployed staff up there and amongst the bush that stayed there 24 hours a day.
Camouflaged tactical officers staked out the bunker, and detectives went in and removed all the food items, restocking the bunker with identical replacements.
So we fingerprinted that night and nothing came up whatsoever.
Most of the food items were either very common, like cans of Coke, or had no barcodes like the apples. But the signature range cheese pointed them to the Food Town supermarket chain. Teams of detectives were sent to all the outlets in Wellington.
We had a bit of a cover story that we were investigating quite a major fraud, and we needed their assistance to try and establish who the offenders were. So we went to their systems and with reams of paper and printed off every purchase of 750-gram signature range block of cheese.
Detectives painstakingly trawled for purchases of the cheese with anything else from the bunker: Coke, apples, biscuits. After sifting through the tens of thousands of transactions, they found a purchase of the cheese and 3 matching items at Food Town in Lower Hutt.
So we went back to that supermarket and looked at their footage, and it depicted an older guy with a younger guy making this purchase using cash. So we had these photographs of these two that we thought, oh, well, it could possibly be somebody that's involved. We don't really know at this stage. So we just put these photos up on the board at the police station saying, can anybody identify them? Does anybody know them? As inquiries progressed and the guys that was camping out at the bunker and keeping observations, this car turns up out of the blue. They watch it come in and park up, and it's got the registration plate Jenny B, and this young guy gets out of the car and he walks up and into the bunker area. He looked around for a while and removed this fern and then proceeded to climb into the bunker. So we had a line of inquiry. The car was registered to a woman by the name of Jennifer Ann Barrett, Jenny B, yeah, and people started to put 2 and 2 together to this photograph that we'd had from the supermarket. That was John Barrett.
John Barrett was a barrister practicing in the Hutt Valley. Police ran checks on the Jenny B number plate.
It had been issued with a speeding fine some months before, and the fine was issued to a guy, Matthew Norman Payne. Our inquiries led to another guy, Simon Philpott, who was John Barrett's stepson. So everything started to fit in. You know, the block of cheese was starting to pay big dividends in terms of the initial inquiries that we did.
Surveillance teams knew Barrett, Payne and Philpott were involved. From the writing on the bunker wall, they were sure a kidnapping was planned. They just didn't know who was going to be kidnapped.
I had a guy who was my needle in the haystack detective. You know, it was, tell me who the victim's going to be. And that was his sole task, based on all the information that was coming into the inquiry. Tell me who the victim's going to be.
There were many possible targets. The All Blacks were due to play South Africa. Could the intended victim be a key player? Or someone from the recently published Rich List? Or perhaps visiting Irish heartthrob Ronan Keating? The inquiry team focused on the suspects, tracking their every move.
They got on Jenny B and they went for a drive, followed by our surveillance squad, and drove off into Wellington and went to the Botanical Gardens. John Barrett and Matt Payne got in the car and went for a walk. The area that they dropped them off into gave us an indication, could this victim be in this area? At this stage, we'd had this device in the car and we could listen to conversation via cell phone from Barrett to Philpott, you know, he's not home.
Then came a breakthrough on identifying the target.
You got the gun ready?
The surveillance team overheard Barrett and Payne discussing getting the gun ready.
Good on you, boy.
And then Barrett made a phone call to the office of a wealthy Wellington businessman to check that he was in town that night. Detectives had to move fast.
So straight away, we think we know who the victim's going to be.
As the suspects headed into town, unmarked police cars tailed them into the city. The intended victim lived near the Botanical Gardens. A heavily armed tactical squad infiltrated the area.
As Barrett and Payne and Philpott had parked the car, Philpott was driving. Barrett and Payne get out, they go to the boot, they remove a bag, and they're heading off into the Botanical Gardens. Barrett wouldn't comply with the police's instructions. A police dog was then released and took him to the ground. Inside the bag there was a sawn-off shotgun, some ammunition in the pocket of the overalls.
A successful operation and a great result, but the case was about to turn bizarre. At trial, Barrett elected to defend himself.
I'm pretending I'm an aircraft like I did when I was 11-year-old, and I'm crazy enough to talk to ducks.
They just tried to portray it as being a game, and they didn't want to go anywhere near the facts of the case, the observations of the police officers, the evidence that we'd gathered through the duration of the inquiry.
Guilty.
I am quite sure that without the intervention of dedicated and careful officers, these accused would have advanced their plan with very concerning results.
And there's one final twist in the tale of the bunker in the bush.
John Barrett, when he was a part of the community, held public meetings where he spoke around the dangers of dropping 1080 poison bait from helicopters. And as a result of that, the regional council workers that were doing the bait laying on foot found the bunker. So everything came back to bite Mr. Barrett in the arse, really.
Caught by a team effort before anyone got hurt. But with untold lives shattered, it would take the creation of a brand new team to catch South Auckland's serial rapist.
We had 40 that we believe were committed by one guy, and he was still out there offending. That was the frightening part about it.
Police say more than one person may be involved, but are worried a serial rapist is on the loose and fear someone could be killed.
Securing a conviction, getting closure for a victim's family, both are big motivators for the detectives. And when they can't get a result, it's hard to take.
Every rape that happened, you felt like you'd failed the victim because you hadn't caught the guy, so he was still out there going.
A 6-year hunt for a serial rapist was a testing time for South Auckland Police, but the operation saw the creation of a new weapon in the detectives' arsenal, a criminal profiling team headed by Dave Henwood.
To be able to profile a crime, it has to be a psychologically driven one where a person does more than just break into a house. He behaves in a way that he has to behave because of the way he's psychologically driven to behave. That's the difference.
From the more than 40 unsolved rapes detectives believed were committed by the one man, they began to form their profile. The rapist would have his first criminal conviction at age 16. He would be a convicted burglar, and he would have some link with the neighbourhoods where he committed the offences. When they factored in the descriptions given by the victims, they had the age range and physical appearance too. The profile enabled detectives to filter 115,000 potential suspects from police records down to 3,000. Police needed to get a DNA sample from all 3,000 to check against samples left at the scene.
They were quite happy to give their blood because they knew what we were there for. And a lot of the people that were on the suspect lake were gang members, but some of the victims were gang-related people as well. So there was a fair bit of empathy there for us. They were quite happy to help us.
One of the team of detectives, dubbed the Blooding Group, called into a South Auckland factory to take a sample from a worker on the list of suspects.
Barry Ramaki took the sample from him. After refused first on religious grounds, then he gave a sample.
The test results took a week to be compared with the samples from the crime scenes. 47 crime scenes from the previous 6 years, 47 victims raped and beaten. The case had been a political football, kept talkback radio running hot, and the people of South Auckland running scared. When the results came in, the offender was identified as Joseph Thompson.
It's hard to reconcile the Joe Thompson sitting in the interview room to the beast that was out on the street. I mean, the victim statements were horrific. And he was this little guy with his hat over his head, just going through it all as if it was a bit of shoplifting or something.
Detectives using criminal profiling had caught Thompson when their traditional methods could not. And the new profilers were used again when a contentious case was reopened after 6 years.
We'd been to see Janine's parents down the Bay of Plenty, outstanding New Zealanders, great people, and they were very grateful that we were having another look at the circumstances of their daughter's death. They never accepted for one moment that she died of asthma.
Janine Law had been found dead in her Grey Lynn house. She had a tea towel stuffed in her throat, and there was evidence she'd been sexually violated. The original investigation ruled the death a tragic accident.
I was asked 6 years later to form a team and have a look at it after the case had been re-examined by a couple of senior detectives. I was given a couple of short paragraphs as to what I was to achieve. One was to find out whose fingerprints were on her bedroom door, which remained unidentified, and to find out who'd had sexual intercourse with her, and to find out whether that was by consent or was there some sinister purpose behind it.
Rutherford handpicked his team of 12 detectives and set up a small inquiry base in Auckland Central Police Station, working under the same roof as the original inquiry team.
Sadly, some people thought we were wasting our time and said so. That was unhelpful.
Close the door, Jim.
Rutherford's team were looking for offenders fitting a certain profile. They trawled through boxes of historical charge sheets.
We had 5 years of them, so I think that's around about 60,000. They were available in archives, and we had to get them out and manually go through them. And if they fitted the criteria we were looking for and the profile of the person we were looking for, they made up the list of persons of interest. Bearing in mind we only wanted one, I think at the end, from memory, we got down to about 350 possibilities.
The team went into the field to find those suspects, to ask them to give blood to rule them in or out of the inquiry. The blood would be checked against a DNA sample preserved from the 6-year-old crime scene.
We found that some were dead, and that was a bit tricky. Some were overseas, so we sent files off overseas. And then, as you'd expect, a number of them are in jail. One of the Auckland prisoners, one of the guys went up there There was 5 that we wanted, and they were asked to come down to the medical centre. There was a nurse available, and they were all told what the inquiry was about. They were given informed knowledge as to why they were giving the blood, and James Tamata was one of those 5, and he saw his colleagues giving the blood, and when it came to him, he threw his arm out. The nurse did what she had to do, and we had his blood.
The suspect looked good on paper, but the wheels of science turned slowly. Rutherford's wait for the DNA results was a long one.
I can remember sort of playing golf, walking up and down fairways, thinking about how much longer. But when the phone call came through to say, hey, here's your man, by crikey, we felt good. And, he was interviewed in jail. He denied it at first. But when he was interviewed, he asked whether or not there was a nun that used to work in the prison. And she sat with him, and she told him, if you've got something to tell the detectives, you should tell the truth. And he broke down and cried and confessed.
The findings of Rutherford's team were a far cry from those of the original inquiry.
The police did a thorough investigation into it, but unfortunately, the truth of the matter is that we didn't get it right. And, sometimes we make mistakes. We're human, and who hasn't made them? I've made plenty, and you learn by them.
Sometimes an inquiry is just too big for a small hand-picked team of a dozen detectives. Sometimes, to solve crime in this modern age, police must join forces with other agencies like customs.
Unfortunately, we have quite a big drug user market in New Zealand, and I don't think we appreciate that. But there are criminal networks in Asia and other parts of the world that are aware of that, and they do prey on New Zealand.
We would receive phone calls weekly from people, from parents, who would ring and say, look, my son or my daughter was a valued member of the family, but 6 months ago something happened. And they are now the most despicable, the most terrible person that we know.
In 2006, the police war on methamphetamine reached new heights when they caught wind of a drug syndicate operating out of China, bringing huge volumes of the drug to New Zealand. Operation Major would take the fight to the syndicate.
The operation culminated in the arrival of 2 containers in May 2006, one containing 95 kilograms of pure methamphetamine, hidden in blocks of epoxy and tins of paint. And quite separate to that was another container that came in with hundreds of bags of cement, 11 of which contained pure, or the contact NT, which is the pseudoephedrine precursor chemical that the New Zealand-based cooks need to manufacture methamphetamine, which I believe had a street value of between $350 and $500 million. It was significant. Now, these are going to people who wouldn't have got school cert science to manufacture a drug that people are putting inside their system.
From the small-time user to the major importers, there are many layers to the meth industry. In order to catch the big players, when police seized the shipment, they kept quiet and instead passed fake drugs on to the dealers.
20 kilograms of what they believed was methamphetamine was delivered to a pre-arranged spot. Happened to be the St Luke's shopping centre car park. Those drugs were surveilled, and 2 offenders came along, picked up the drugs which were in the boot of a car, took the car away.
A covert approach would lead detectives to the big players, but terminating the operation would be direct and in your face. When police joined with customs to intercept a massive shipment of methamphetamine, they tracked the distributors to a house in Koimarama. It was time to terminate Operation Major.
Found them with scales and drugs and a range of cell phones ready to make calls for the distribution. There's 5 or 6 firearms loaded in the house, an M16, a number of pistols, revolvers. it's just brought it home to my staff and everybody else that this is a dangerous business.
7 major players in the methamphetamine trade were arrested and an estimated $500 million worth of the drug confiscated.
At the conclusion of Operation Major, where we had the successful seizures, you would expect that the market supply of methamphetamine and contact NT would dry up. There was a small blip in the price for about 2 to 4 weeks. And that gap that we'd taken out was just taken up by others. That syndicate was one of about 5 that I estimated operating at that time. So if you say that each one of them was worth that amount of money, it puts you in the ballpark of what the size of the methamphetamine market was in 2006. Nothing's changed.
Drug crime dominates the news, but when it comes to headlines, not all offences are media-friendly. Detective Senior Sergeant Tasha Penny was second in charge when a man beat his partner after they'd been out at a family wedding.
The male had accused the woman of flirting with another person at the party, and they'd left the party, and then the violence had started. He'd started hitting her around the head, and then he grabbed the grab handle in a car, in a four-wheel drive. He'd wrenched that out of the car, which that would show you the anger he had, and he had used that to violate her.
The woman was killed. Police needed to get word out in the media to encourage witnesses to come forward, but Tasha and the inquiry team struggled to get buy-in from journalists.
I had a conversation with a reporter whom I had time for, who actually said to me, "Oh, but this is a family violence matter." And that really struck a chord with me, because I thought, if you think, but this is a family violence matter and it's less important than the other perhaps high-profile cases we've had, then we have an issue. So for me to have somebody who is educated and worldly tell me that this is just a family violence incident, it was so wrong.
So Tasha brought the reporter to the police station to meet the homicide team.
A homicide base tells a story, pretty much. It tells a story of perhaps the critical things in relation to the incident. We have a photo board, so you'll have the photo of the deceased person there. But the other victims, who are just as important, and in relation to this case, were her 5 children. We made sure they took pride of place on that victims board, because unfortunately Sarah had died, but her 5 children were now left without a mother. She had a look around the base. She talked to a couple of the staff about the impact, and it was great to see that she really did change her mind. She actually ended up apologising for that comment.
The reporter not only apologised, but wrote a front-page article highlighting the abuse the woman had suffered at the hand of her partner.
Her family had known about some of the violence, and they had made offers and tried to help her get out of the relationship. And we profiled the relationship, and it was effective. After that, I had women ringing me saying, "I've read this story, and it's my story, and I'm going to be killed. How do I get out of it?"
While horrific crimes might be solved by sharing the workload among the team, the emotional burden is often shouldered alone.
When you make a career of investigating death, violent death, you develop a very strong professional mechanism that leaps up and protects you from the horror.
But in some cases, the horror is just too hard to ignore. When 2-year-old Lily Bing was abused and killed at the hands of her aunties, Detective Superintendent Rod Drew was put in charge of the case.
I think a little bit sticks with deaths like the death of Lily Bing. And so it's just that little piece that sticks, and there might be another one that sticks a little bit more. So it does have an effect downstream. I don't have any doubt about that at all. It certainly has on me.
The case also took a heavy toll on Drew's team, 2 detectives quitting in the wake of the inquiry.
I've got no doubt at all that this case had an impact on their leaving.
Dave Whitford recalls well his first homicide, where a 2-year-old girl had been killed as a result of abuse by her parents.
Particularly tough because the little girl was the same age as our son was then. I can recall coming home from the post-mortem on that particular one, and here's my son carrying around a little wee stool that he used to use, and by using that he could just get to the bench and help mum and me or whatever, cooking and all that sort of thing. And I came home from the post-mortem that day, and he lost his balance and fell on the floor. He started crying. I picked up the wee stool and just hurled it through the kitchen door. One of the legs went through the jibboard in the hall, and then I immediately got berated by my wife and my very upset son. And I was challenged to do a real job on the stool if I felt like that, and so I took it outside and I smashed it to 1,000,000 pieces. So it does affect you.
Crimes against children can be the toughest assignments, and when 14-year-old Gloria Kong was kidnapped from her home in 1983, detectives faced a massive challenge.
Kidnappings are very different. In a homicide, the damage has already been done, but in a kidnapping, there's the capacity for you to cause considerable further harm through any error that you might make.
Within hours of the girl being taken by armed kidnappers, police had set up a massive operation. But for the very first time in New Zealand's history, detectives insisted on a full media blackout.
If you had this being plastered across TV, it can cause consternation amongst the offenders, thinking, I've got a tiger by the tail here, and you may well frighten them off, and they abandon the victim who's left tied somewhere and would die in the meantime.
The stakes were high. It was critical that the media maintained the news blackout until police had recovered the girl. When 14-year-old Gloria Kong was kidnapped, detectives insisted on a full media blackout in case news coverage caused her to be harmed. No one was allowed to report on the kidnapping during the embargo, but detectives gave the reporters access to the inquiry team to prepare stories.
Editors and etc. worked closely with us. Everyone was concerned, in fact, for the safety of this young girl.
Incredibly, young Gloria managed to free herself and escape her captors. With the girl now safe and the media working closely with the inquiry team, Stokes let the kidnapping hit the headlines. Next, recorded conversations of the kidnappers' phone calls were broadcast nationwide, and detectives appealed for public help to identify him.
I'll call you back about leaving the cash. Don't call the pigs.
We had a number of suggestions on names, but one name in particular cropped up, and we deliberately continued to play the tape with a view to softening that person up for the interview, and it worked very well. Everywhere he went, acquaintances said, by God, that voice sounds like yours. And in fact, even his mother said, David, that sounds like your voice. So that when the detective arrived, he was quite happy to talk to us. By then he'd basically had enough.
The crime was actually solved by the community, assisted by the police in that order.
The operation showed the importance of making the news media part of the investigative team. Understanding how the media can advance an investigation is one of the many skills needed by the modern detective.
As a senior detective fronting the media, you need to work out first who your audience is, who is it that you're trying to talk to. Is it just the general public to reassure them about what's happened and what they can expect? Or is it a particular witness who's been seen somewhere who you're trying to say, you know, the person in the red coat walking the dog, we want to talk to you? Or is it the general appeal to anyone who was in that area at that particular time? Or is it trying to communicate subtly with the offender?
I'd often have a strategy where I'd have a case that was of some interest, and I'd sit down and think, well, I can release this bit now, I'll keep that bit till the next day, and then I'll release something on the third day, and then I'll have something different for the fourth day, and then hopefully there'll be a development in the inquiry where I'll be able to give them something on the fifth day. And then you think about how you're going to work it into the next week.
30 years after the Gloria Kong kidnapping, when Howick woman Kelly Zhao was abducted, Neil Grimstone took an entirely different approach to using the news media.
We decided we had to go public and put some pressure on these crooks to say that we knew what was going on, that we were involved, and that you know, it's only going to be a matter of time and we're going to come looking for you and we're going to find you, and we want this woman back in one piece.
Demanded $500,000 in cash to be paid by noon just gone.
I know you have grave fears for her safety. Are you perhaps further endangering her life by going public?
Well, you know, these are tactical decisions that we've made, and sometimes we're damned if we do and damned if we don't. They hadn't contacted us by the first deadline. We made an assumption, and that's the reason we've gone down that road.
Fortunately, the decision we made was the right one, and clearly the crooks felt the heat and decided that they hadn't perhaps got this right, and it was best to dump her and where we would find her.
Kelly Zhao was rescued by police in this industrial street in Onehunga in South Auckland. She'd been held captive for more than 20 hours.
It was a huge relief to have her back safe and sound and not physically harmed. You then go into a phase where you start tracking down the offenders, which is where we went once we got her back.
The Chinese community were quick to assist the police, and the 4 offenders were brought to justice. And it's that close relationship with the community in areas like South Auckland that can be a lifeline for detectives battling violent street crime.
You'd get carloads of young men, and they're predominantly men, and they would go to another person or another area to intimidate the others, and you'd get carloads of people who would know about it to go and watch, and they'd have fights, and they'd organise this through text messaging. It was a fight by arrangement. The majority of these young men went to school, reasonably good grades, went to church, did the family thing, well respected, but by night they turned into a different sort of being.
Police can't cope. We are stretched. We can't cope with what's going on.
I fronted the media and said that the level of violence in Counties Manukau had escalated to the extent that it was out of control, that the police were the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, and that we needed the community to assist us with actually dealing with this problem. As a result of that, a number of community projects were put in place around Counties Manukau, and they've worked well to actually reduce the level of violence and actually reduce the escalation of it.
One tight-knit community found themselves under fire in a series of armed robberies.
Make no mistake about it, we, the detectives and the police, were under a certain amount of pressure. This was a whodunit for $130. We didn't have a clue who the hell was responsible for it.
Steve Rutherford has seen more than his share of violence, with more than 30 years policing the streets of Auckland. It was the middle of the night when he was called out to a shooting in East Auckland.
Inside this pizza shop, things lie scattered as they did on the night Marcus Doig lost his life. Outside, police are literally sifting for clues.
It's a matter I'll never really ever forget, especially having to go around and see his mum and dad the next day, try and bring some form of sense, some sort of reassurance to them, introduce myself and some of the people that went with me to tell them that we'd do our very best to bring these criminals, scumbags, call them what you like, to justice. I wasn't going to bring their son back, but I wanted them to know that we were going to do what we could for them and leave no stone unturned to bring theirs to justice.
But Rutherford's team had barely got started when the gunman struck again.
This security vision from the ASB Bank captures the seconds before a 44-year-old teller was shot by a lone gunman yelling obscenities and demanding money.
The bank teller cooperated, and I'm told his arms up in the surrender position, and for his troubles got shot right in the head again. Not only was he murdered, he was executed. Like, to be honest with you, When I went to the Mangere Bridge and got a full summary, I looked at some of my senior staff there. Some of them looked shattered. I felt knots in my stomach. You felt, who's going to be next?
With a killer on the loose, detectives feared there would be more carnage if they didn't catch him soon. Steve Rutherford knew the best chance was enlisting the help from the community in the firing line. He hit the headlines, with the young gunman's image plastered across the front of the daily paper.
He wasn't the most sophisticated criminal, and his disguise wasn't particularly sharp. And to be fair, and this is a big call, his parents identified him on the front page of the Herald and made contact with the police. And I had the utmost respect for them for showing the courage and fortitude to come forward, because if they hadn't, there's no question we would have got him, but there could have been more victims.
Have you plead guilty or not guilty?
Guilty. Sorry.
Essie Faliali'i's guilty plea saw him sentenced to life imprisonment along with his partners in crime.
They were just greedy, bloody criminals. They didn't care who got hurt, who got killed. It was all about money and greed. And the only good thing about them is that they're where they are for a long, long time.
The news media were crucial to the identification of the killer gunman, and the same partnership with the eyes and ears of the community helped detectives when a backpacker was murdered in Taranaki.
Being a German tourist, it was a hugely high-profile case because it had implications for the rest of New Zealand as a terrible place or a good place, but our reputation was on the line, and we sort of knew that.
When a woman's body was found off a bush track, Detective Senior Sergeant Grant Coward was quick to mobilise his inquiry team and to use the cameras to communicate with the killer.
We will find you. Come forward now. She had clearly been beaten. Having a cursory search of her, and we found a small piece of paper that had a phone number on it. And the phone number was a Wanganui phone number, and the people there confirmed that this woman had stayed with them the night before. So within probably 2 or 3 hours, we were able to determine who the victim was, and it was Birgit Brouwer, who was a German tourist hitchhiking around New Zealand.
The Wanganui couple explained that Birgit wanted to hitchhike to New Plymouth. They told her not to and offered to drive her.
She says, oh no, I'll be okay, you know, I've hitchhiked all around New Zealand. And so they took her to the north end of Wanganui, and they watched her thumb a ride north. In fact, brilliantly, they recorded the registration number of the vehicle that she got into at the north end of Wanganui.
Detectives raced to find the driver and found him quickly enough. But he dropped Birgit Brouwer in the tiny township of Waitotara.
She was just going on how she was enjoying her stay and everything, and it's just a tragic event.
Detectives started going door to door.
And found a woman who regularly phoned her mother in the Hawke's Bay, and while she was on the phone she looked out her ranch slider window, and under the light standard was our victim Birgit seeking a ride. She did some excellent work and note the time, and also the fact that her packs were thrown in the back of a four-wheel drive vehicle.
In rural New Zealand, four-wheel drives are a dime a dozen. But when detectives making inquiries on the main highway got to the Waverley BP, they were told the town had its own security cameras.
This footage was shown to our witness in Waitotara. I think there were, in an hour-long period from 9 o'clock till 10:15, there was something like 12 four-wheel drive vehicles went through Waverley in that direction. I think she came to the 8th one and she said, that's the vehicle. That is the vehicle that your hitchhiker got into.
Thanks to that community vigilance, detectives now knew exactly the make and model they were looking for and appealed for sightings of the 1987 Hilux Surf.
In total, there was something like 200 Toyota Hiluxes in this area, in Wanganui and New Plymouth combined.
Sightings began to flood in from around the region.
3 people at Lucy's Gully told us they'd seen a Toyota Hilux or something similar there. 4 people came forward and said that they'd seen a Toyota Hilux at a little place called Cardiff. We then had information from people who had seen the Hilux at Lake Rotakari.
Then an astute constable in Foxton provided the inquiry with a major lead. A local farmer had reported the theft of his grey Hilux. He'd lent it to a farmhand who hadn't returned it.
His name was Michael Wallace. He became a person of interest to us.
Specialist search teams were sent to the areas where the Hilux had been spotted. At a remote stream, the investigators got the breakthrough they'd been seeking.
We found cigarette butts which had Michael Wallace's DNA on it. We found a metal bar in the river, which we believed was a weapon, because on the back of Birgit's leg was a welt from a swing from a weapon on her leg, and the metal bar had a little T-point on the end, and the T-point is clearly visible on her leg. And so as time progressed, we got that metal bar examined, and it was found to have Birgit's DNA in it. So I mean, that clearly showed that it had been used on her.
They now had a solid link between Wallace, the Hilux, and Birgit Brouwer. The inquiry team now numbered more than 60, and it wasn't long before the Hilux was found abandoned in the Ohau River near Levin. The hunt for Wallace intensified. He knew the area and was a difficult man to track.
He is transient, and we believe he's got some bush skills.
But enlisting the help of the whole community paid off. When Wallace stole another car from a small town, a vigilant resident spotted him and called the police.
Captured, cuffed and caught on AmCam. On the 18th day of the inquiry, police finally nabbed their man.
Wallace was convicted of murder and sentenced to 18 years in prison.
The media was a huge challenge, but they were hugely effective because the public came on board and they helped us dramatically. Without the public of New Zealand, we wouldn't have got where we did with this case. There's no doubt in my mind about that. But they came forward and helped us. And, you put the public's help together with a team of dedicated detectives who want to achieve a result, you do achieve a result.
It's those results, knowing they're making a difference, that provides the detectives of the Criminal Investigation Branch the motivation to walk into the fray when others turn away.
The biggest buzz I get, the biggest thing that brings me to work every day is working with these young men and women who are as excited about doing those things as I was, they're talented and they're keen and they're full of energy, and they're here every day doing those sometimes thankless tasks, those sometimes horrific tasks, because they think that's worth doing. And I love it. It energises me.
Cleaning up the mess of society, or helping to clean up the mess of society. And they do it every day. It's not just once in a blue moon. It's out there. They're doing it every day, 24 hours a day. And it takes special people.
Everyone likes them, to solve a mystery. And that is often a driver for us. It's a driver for me, but really the main driver is that one of getting some satisfaction for your victim. Actually bringing people to the courts of justice is a real sense of achievement.
I've got family, friends, and certainly I want this city, this country to be as safe for them as it possibly can be. If we do our job as well as we can, it's going to be safer.